Meredith, thank you so much. This was heavy stuff.
It is heavy stuff.
Important stuff. Can we become a little personal? Talk about you for a moment, the lighter side of things.
Let's see.
Yeah. All right. When one Googles you or looks at Wikipedia, it's easy to see that a lot of information that usually is there about famous people is not there, like your date of birth, like your parents, your upbringing, all these things. This is on purpose, correct?
Yes. I'm a privacy person, and it always felt odd saying that to other people. I also grew up in Los Angeles, so I saw fame close up somewhat, and it was a kind of seedy business. The people behind the scenes were always richer and more comfortable, so I learned to be a bit wary of kind of putting your real life out there. It's also just best practice, particularly because a lot of those, your birthday, your hometown, all of that, those are the answers you have to give your bank and your credit card. So they actually reveal a lot more personal information in many cases. So I would advise against putting that stuff online. But yeah, it's been conscious. I also want, I'm a woman in an industry that is almost all men, and I want to be known for my ideas and my work. I don't want to be known for sort of a triviality that people found fascinating about my teen years.
Well, I, by the way, take solace in the fact that my age on Wikipedia is wrong.
That's even better.
Isn't
if I could work that out, I would try.
That's true camouflage. But talking about teenage years nonetheless, you not only grew up in LA, but you grew up in a hippie environment, correct?
This is true. This is true.
And at a Steiner school, for one, I think. So how was this, and what did it do to you?
I'm sure you all know Steiner School because it came from this world and then was transplanted into sort of heterodox 1990s counterculture, which was its own particular world in Los Angeles. I think you never get grades, and there was sort of it was a bit feral. There's a kind of ideological underpinning to Steiner schools that is often really mystical, kind of theological. The real world collapses with a sort of fairy tale very often, and so I think in some ways my commitment to empiricism, like I need to know what's real and I need to say it, was born of an agitation between that sort of conflation of fact and fiction and the unreliable narrators that often populated sort of refugees for the heterodox like hippie culture in the 1990s after it was basically not a thing anymore, and Steiner School and all of that. So I would attribute that, but again, as an empiricist, I don't have a control, so it's hard to say what would have been.
So from LA, you go on to study at UC Berkeley, famous Berkeley, but you don't study data science or anything like that. You study rhetoric.
Yeah, I studied rhetoric and English literature, but they somehow didn't put that on my Wikipedia.
Because rhetoric is more interesting.
Yeah, and rhetoric at Berkeley means critical theory, but they wanted like a separate fancy department, so they called it rhetoric.
And then you go out to make some money, and you go to Google. Do you think they would take you again? They would make the same decision once more?
If they read my Wikipedia or not?
At the same time.
I don't know. I mean, that was a wild time. So I went to Google because I put my resume on a resume website, and that was the first recruiter to contact me. And at the time, they were hiring people who had high GPAs from schools they considered elite, and I had managed that, right? So I went to Google in 2006. It's a couple thousand people. Everyone is complaining that it's too big, that it's no longer the family it used to be. And I was just fascinated and, hugely alienated by this environment. Because it was, everything, there was free juice, very expensive juice, but it was free. It was like aesthetically so dumpy and like not pleasing, like, you know, plastic trays with foie gras on them was the sort of, you know, how it felt. And it was just full of men, and a kind of, you know, there was an exuberant hubris to it as well. Like, people really thought they'd found the formula to the ethical billionaire, right? There was, you know, that was a time when, you know, they were making the money on search. They were making huge promises. We're never going to be a military contractor. We're never going to put ads on the homepage. That's simply, like, you know, not classy, and we would never do it. And so I was really trying to figure out, like, where does the money come from? What is a server? How do we, you know, how are these things built? And I happened to be there at a time when there was just a huge amount of room and a lot of money. So I was able to take, you know, a lot of classes. I was able to learn programming. I was, you know, kind of able to sit in a hallway with a whiteboard and have a, you know, kind old graybeard explain what a function was to me. And that sort of, you know, that was the flywheel of my education, was both sort of asking questions like, what's all the world's information? And then realizing, like, that's not it, right? Like, that can't be your definition, because that's not everything in the world. That's just things people put in markup and didn't have robust text to exclude from the search crawl. So, like, how are, you know, like, whoa, how is this kind of collapse between marketing and reality happening? So I feel very privileged, but it was also, you know, I was very fortunate. I was fortunate to just be pulled into that, to have a vision from the inside as this business model metastasized, and to see kind of the progression from a very self-sure small company into, you know, an incredibly harmful surveillance monopoly that has now supplanted many nation states in terms of the power they wield over core infrastructure.
You were there for 12 years. For a while, they liked you to be critical and, in a way, internally protesting. When did that stop, and why did that stop? When did they stop liking you?
Well, a lot of them still like me. You know, there's some people who, you know, they're kind of grateful for the critics. I still have friends at the company, but I think it was, you know, there was a very, so I had built the open research group. I was doing the work on AI. I was being recognized for it, and I had a very unique position where I was out in the world, like, often speaking very critically of the company or of its policies, promoting privacy in ways that Google was not adopting or was eroding, you know, talking about the dangers of AI when they were, you know, at that point we were adopting machine learning, but they, like, picked up the marketing term a couple years later. And I felt like I was making change because I was vocal. I was in the rooms. I was sort of embraced for that role. And I was very accountable to that analysis. I was incredibly earnest, very sincere. And I think it was, you know, for me, there was a very bright line in late 2017 when I learned about the Maven contract. And this was a secretive contract between Google and the Department of Defense to build AI targeting and surveillance infrastructure for the drone war. And I described the signature strike up here, but the signature strike is, you know, immoral, illegal, and was sort of the hallmark of that drone war, that post 9/11 era. So imagining what is now happening, the combination of these capabilities, I recognized I had made my name, I had made my money, I had sort of a nice little thing going on, based on work that was sort of opposing that, right? And I couldn't just stand by and be like, well, I guess I'm going to continue to be, what I've called the dissent court jester, right? Like, they love to hear what I say, but when the decisions are made, I'm not in the room, right? I don't actually have influence, but I do make Google look good because it appears that they're a very pluralistic and very open company. So I was very angry, and that was when things kind of shifted, and I started organizing. I started sort of more sincere pushback. I started looking at, what forces in the history have checked centralized capitalist power, and how would we do that in this case?
I don't want to make you angry here, because I know that you have had a lot of lessons in self-defense, and you showed me some scary stuff. But from what I remember is that then you decided to be as outspoken and nasty within Google as possible, correct?
I think nasty is their word.
All right.
Not mine. Well, I think, so after So after we started organizing, and when you're doing something like that, it's always kind of an experiment. You're on a signal group at night with your friends. You're, hey, should we do this? Hey, this is really, really bad. Should we talk to this guy? Should we talk to that guy? You're trying things. You're seeing if they work. You're kind of building connections with each other. And that went on from late 2017 through sort of early to mid 2018, and it blew up, right? We had thousands of people joining us. We had a research team that was sort of researching the history of the drone war and kind of documenting the way that these AI systems would never be capable of doing what the company was saying they were doing. We had a whistleblowing network that went through different nodes on Signal so that you were distancing the person who accessed the raw material from the person who was giving it to a journalist. We had a whole infrastructure built up. And it was through that period that I realized Maven was a very small contract, but it was the lead on to this entree into defense contracting. So there was another $1 billion contract, many $1 billion contract that Maven was the trial run for. And I basically realized I had hit a tripwire. You don't mess with money like that without getting punished for it. So I could put my head down, I could sort of, bank my win, and then they would figure out how to push me out and I'd have, a suburban life somewhere. Or I could go as hard as I could and try to make the most of the fact that we were, beginning to build momentum. We were beginning to build a critical infrastructure within the company and outside that was both questioning what a worker's role in a tech company was vis-a-vis these decisions, vis-a-vis the work we work on, and was beginning to actually build the muscle to push back. So I chose the latter, and I just, I testified in front of Congress without permission. I would write op-eds without permission. I mean, I didn't get permission. At that point, I had lawyers. I was filing employment complaints. We were staging actions. And it was really sort of building this momentum for about a year and a half, a very stressful year and a half. But I would do it again. Until
No wonder they called it nasty from their point of view. But
well, I mean, I think building AI targeting systems for signature strikes is nasty. I think this is what ethics with teeth looks like.
By the way, you mentioned in your talk then the employment of this technology in the Gaza war today. But if I understood you correctly, it would be as bad anywhere else in the world, from China to Iran and anywhere.
It would have to have a certain combination of factors. In its deployment anywhere in the world is and would be terrible. It was terrible when it was deployed in Yemen in the drone war, killing wedding parties and families based on data profiles that were probably compared against a messed up model, right? This is immoral. But what we're talking about is the combination of these sort of supercharged AI capabilities with that logic of ad targeting with mass civilian surveillance. So you have to have the data and process it on the people you're targeting in order to run these systems. And so there are governments that have this data in lesser and more degrees. There are populations that are more surveilled and less surveilled. And of course, who are the actors who have this data across billions and billions of people? It's these surveillance companies that collect them via platforms and via other affordances, across their massive user base. So that is the combination of factors that we should be really worried about, and we should be particularly worried, for me, about the lack of outcry about the deployment of these systems right now. Because if we don't stop them, if we aren't just incredibly clear, if we don't, muster our dignity to reject this, it's a really scary future with a possible Trump presidency, kind of governing these many corporations who are right now pitching this technology to the Department of Defense and other militaries.
Let's, for the sake of time, skip a couple of the stages in your life and come to Signal, which now again is severely criticized, not only by the head of Telegram, but also by Elon Musk, who at a certain stage, actually supported your company, or at least he said he did. So, and they claim that your encryption is not as tight, as airtight as you claim, and that data from Signal has shown up in court cases brought up by the state, if I understand that correctly. Is that just the revenge of big tech, or what's behind this?
Well, I would just say between me and Elon, only one of us retweets Nazis. So, I don't really know what's behind it, or I can't prove it, right? But we do see this line of attack often in time with escalations in the Ukraine war. And of course, militaries across the world rely on Signal because it actually is tested, hardened, developed in the open, verified. It really does the thing it says. And when there's a bug, we fix it really quickly. So it is core infrastructure for militaries across the world, for journalists, for activists. It's incredibly important technology. And there are always actors who would like to force their opponents or the populations they want to oppress or the journalists they want to spy on onto less secure communications networks in order to spy on them, in order to constitute social control through information asymmetry. So the rhetoric we're hearing is very similar to different, what I would say are, disinformation campaigns. We've seen worming their way through the internet. But what was interesting this time is sort of Elon amplifying it. And all these guys use Signal. Everyone who has confidential communications or sort of corporate business or what have you uses Signal. So I can't speak to Elon's interiority or what he was thinking. But thankfully, because Signal has built such a robust reputation, by being trustworthy over and over and over again for years, by Moxie, Marlinspike, and Trevor Perrin creating a paradigm-shifting cryptographic protocol about 10 years ago that enabled meaningful secure communications over mobile applications, by publishing that in the open so that cryptographers and security experts could hammer it, could try to find flaws. And by standing the test of time, we have a lot, I would call it an immune system consisting of the technical community who will step in and say, actually, this doesn't make sense. Actually, this is total BS. Actually, this looks like an op. So, we are defended that way. But I do think as the line moves toward the authoritarian, we're going to see more of this, and we're going to have to figure out how we create networks of validation and how we, frankly, protect these technologies that will become only more imperative in the future.
Meredith, do you have any admiration for the guy who single-handedly brought the electric car to the Western industry? Do you have any admiration left for Larry Page, who with his software made internet-wide search possible? Or is this long gone and you see these guys all critical?
Look, Larry's a really nice guy. He was, like a kind of putsy, very, very smart guy who would listen when you spoke. Elon seems lost and tired. This is not personal, right? What it's about is the extraordinary power these individuals wield, whether or not I have affection for them and what they're doing about that power. This isn't personal. This isn't nasty. This isn't Meredith versus Elon. This is, hey, we need to preserve, say, our democracy, our information ecosystems, our ability to communicate intimately and privately, our ability to govern our own, communities, cultures, towns, countries. And these technologies and the imperative for endless profit, endless growth, endless control, abstracted, surveillance as a means of understanding our world is toxic to those ends. So I will stop them, not out of unkindness or dislike, but because I don't think we can create a livable future on the path they're putting us on.
We have asked our our young idea creators from the festival to prepare 2 challenges for you. And they're sitting in the first row, all the way on the left and all the way on the right. And I think it's Ida who is going to start. Ida, here you go.
Follow up on Joschka Fischer. When we talk about AI, we always ask how to deal with it and how do we protect ourselves from it. But we never ask whether we need it or not. So, do we need AI at all?
This is just a beautiful question. I don't even feel challenged. I'm just so grateful that you put it that way. Because I think that is the most important question, right? And when I'm asked about our digital futures or how do we create tech for good, my reflex is often to say, how do we create a livable society? How do we, deal with climate? How do we work together? How do we ensure democracy? And once we have those answers, where, if at all, does tech serve a purpose, right? And I think this is particularly important because the thing we're calling AI, the thing that marketing term is describing in this decade, are these massive models that require huge amounts of computational infrastructure. They're centralized, and the climate impact of the computational toll of training and deploying AI is just eye-watering. So we're often talking about a technology that is moving us closer to climate crisis, and when we look at what it actually does, it's like email prompts. So I think that nothing is inevitable, and I think we should claim the right to question whether and where we need AI at all, and if this version of AI, this bigger is better kind of macho version that is eating up the Earth's energy, is actually what we want. Thank you.
Franzi.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you, first of all, for all your work. I'm wondering, people like you that really want to use tech for good, if they leave these big corporations that will continue to be influential and they won't go away anytime soon, don't we leave them also to the quote-unquote bad guys, the ones that maybe don't care about democratic values, but only about the bottom line?
That's a very good question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. I was pushed out after, a long time. I probably would have left anyway, because for me, that path had run its course. But I don't have, I never give people prescriptive advice. Really, some people are on visas. Some people have medical conditions that in the US you can't get care for unless you have employer insurance. Some people are actually doing incredible work doing harm reduction inside these companies. There are many people inside all of these companies, as bad as the structure is, who are like that one person holding the line on the privacy decision, and they leave and you see things collapse. So I don't think there's a generalizable answer to this, but I would also say don't kid yourself that just making a paycheck is kind of making things better from the inside and then sort of ride on that complacency either. This is a question that needs to be a verb every day, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Meredith, you're going to stay in Europe this year, correct?
For about 6 months, yeah.
And you're planning to go to Paris. But now that you have seen Hamburg sunshine...
It's very tempting. And your townhouses have gardens, which is such a novelty for a New Yorker. It's very beautiful. So if I don't move here, which, I have an apartment rented in Paris, so that's a little complicated, I am aware that the trains run really well in Europe, so I would like to visit you.
All right. You're always welcome here, of course, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for this conversation and for being you. Thank you, Meredith Whittaker.
Thank you. It's an honor.